Yes. Yes. So, dear friends and colleagues, in case I will not have enough time to finish my presentation, the answer to that question is yes.
So answer on the question or on the statement?
The question, which is
there. Not Pan-Heresy is not yes, but...
No. Would Justin and Luther understand each other? The answer is yes. In a recent article published in Ostkirchliche Studien, it is written, let me strongly confirm that there are not so many differences between Luther and Justin. And this is the point which I would like to develop. Although Justin Popovich criticized Luther / Protestantism heavily and sharply, I think that they were much more closer than Justin has been aware of. When I say Martin Luther, I have in mind the German reformer Martin Luther from 16th century, former Augustinian monk, reformer against his own will, professor of theology in Wittenberg. He said the church should return to its roots and thought that the church of his time had gone far too away from original teaching. He published or nailed, and he didn't do either, 95 theses in 1517. 2 years ago there was a huge celebration, 500 years from beginning of the Reformation. He thought that salvation is not earned by good deeds, but are received only as free gift of God's grace through the believer's faith in Jesus Christ as Redeemer from sin. His theology challenged the Pope, Roman Catholic Church, by teaching that the Bible is the only source of divinely revealed knowledge. He translated the Bible into German vernacular, and this was the beginning. Well, there were some translations into local languages even before, but this was the big start. Even the print press has been invented, so this all helped. The righteous will live by faith. Romans 1:17 is a very famous sentence that he kind of hooked up and developed it. It was first in the prophet Habakkuk, and so on and so on. Just to say that the relation between Luther's, and maybe this is from small articles, the first and chief article is this: Jesus Christ our God and Lord died for our sins, and at the very below, this faith alone justifies us. Small articles are kind of the summary of the faith that he believed, that the movement that was gathered around Martin Luther believed and confessed. To combine Luther studies and Orthodox Church is not anything new and surprising. This is just a short side note. There is a new Finnish interpretation of Luther. Father is Tuomo Mannermaa. You can see him in the corner. Tuomo Mannermaa. In his book from 1989, published in German, he developed or combined justification and theosis. And also it's important that the external impulse for this new movement of Luther studies is a result of the ecumenical dialogue between Evangelical Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland and the Russian Orthodox Church. So this is a good tip for a new article where I see a lot of similarities, where if you would interpret Luther, Justin through this perspective, it will bring much more similarities. So that's what it is. Back to Justin and Luther. Just a few introductory statements. There is not really much written on the topic. Here or there a sentence, here or there a paragraph. The longest exposition is 2.5 pages in the first volume of Dogmatics about the original sin. That's the longest one. Very often Justin used Luther and Protestantism as synonyms, although he was aware that Luther is the father of Protestantism, but very often they were synonyms. But on the other hand, he also used the word Protestantism as a general term for all the churches which developed after the Reformation from the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. Of course, this is a problematic because Lutheranism, Protestantism, they are not the same things. I would be interested, maybe this is the question I would ask Bogdan Lubadic, if he ever found where did Justin found a source, where did he learn about Lutheranism, Protestantism, if there are ever. But from what I have been reading, always he means Luther. He doesn't even mean the Lutheran Orthodoxy or the second generation of Lutheranism, but he very often means Luther. Even he uses the word Protestantism. Then another thing, the word Protestantism is today ecclesiologically common term that really combines this kind of, you have the Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and then you have the Protestant churches. So there will be the Lutheran churches of the Orthodox Confession, Reformed or Baptists, Methodists, Adventists. They would all be covered in the word Protestantism. Doesn't seem that Justin has this in mind. He uses the word basically the historical, and then you have the 1529 is where the word Protestantism appeared, where the free cities and the princes protested against the Reichstag in that canceled the cuius regio is religio, and they kind of protested, and then since then it's the word Protestantism. Another note, he very often uses the word Protestantism, and he talks about Luther and Protestantism in connotation with the Roman Catholicism. We will hear probably more about the papacy. Very often he starts with the papacy, papal infallibility, and then just adds a note about the Protestantism. Not always when he talks about the Roman Catholicism he adds Protestantism, but whenever he talks about Protestantism it is in this context. Even the wider context in which he talks is actually the discussion between the so-called European humanism and the Svetoslavski humanism, or just to have these two very broad categories. I'm not sure if this is important, but this is a good example of the original scene from the first volume of Dogmatics, where it's visible that actually Justin knows his stuff. He knows Luther. What he interprets there as a Protestant position is actually Luther's position, but he doesn't really know everything about Luther, and he doesn't know how the discussion continued. So the nature of man became a sin, even kind of the image of Satan replaced the image of God. He says that it's kind of the Protestant position. It is true that for Luther, our will is captive, our nature became a sin. This comes from the St. Augustine, because not only that he was an Augustinian monk and Augustine was compulsory reading, but there are some other things why Augustine is there. But he doesn't know something that Luther expresses as a simus justus et peccator. So the person is always absolute sinner and absolute righteous, and he always has this kind of dual nature. So it is true that our will is captive, and it is true that we are under the sin. For Justin, that is too pessimistic, but that's not whole. There is that we are also absolute, so we live in sin, but at the same time we live also in the hope. Absolute righteous, so righteous and righteous and sinful at the same time. That's kind of one of the basic concept of Luther's anthropology. He doesn't even know that there was a discussion between the so-called Ignatian Lutherans and Philippists. You have here the Philip Melanchthon, where this has been kind of developed, and Philip, although he was the close associate of Luther and shared with him the base thoughts, but he was kind of the second generation, or he was much younger than he was, then he added the free will, and the free will kind of cooperates with the salvation, and then there was a big strife, conflict between the Ignatian Lutherans, kind of the radical Lutherans, and the Philippists. So the discussion continued. For Justin, it was just one part of Luther. So this would deserve a much more bigger discussion. Now, the humanism. I won't talk much about the humanism, but we heard quite a lot, and we will hear tomorrow in one of the presentations. In his from 1925, Erovský člověk na žaravičné rozkresnici, this kind of gives a quite a comprehensive summary of what he means by the humanism, European humanism. It is quite maybe important that he doesn't use the word European in the text very often, or maybe at all. It is in the title, but it is very often just the humanism. It is a term that he uses for uncritical trust in human capabilities and possibilities. This is already my interpretation. I believe this is a very explicit critique of enlightenment and rationalism, and by man he actually means the cogito, the reason. This would be the Western terminology which would lead, because the East didn't go to the Enlightenment, so that's the reason why it's problematic. This reason replaced God, declared man to become God, and became the measure of all things visible. Results are catastrophic. I quote, "Many monsters roared out from each and every pore, wheezing and shaking the earth, such as futurists, decadents, anarchists, nihilists, and so on and so on and so on." These are not humanism, but humanism is the father of all these movements, which are only a result of a certain turn. In his 1935, that's his lecture, which is repeated many times, to the faculty when he was becoming docent. It actually ends the third volume of the dogmatics. This is, if I'm not wrong, the first time when he enters the Protestantism in the discussion, and he connects humanism and Christianity. Maybe in Western Europe, Christianity has gradually transformed into humanism. Then he talks about infallible man in Rome, infallible man in Berlin, and at the very bottom, Papism and Protestantism, man has replaced man with the God-man. Man has replaced the God-man. I don't know who is infallible man in Berlin. I think this is a faux pas. So Berlin never played any role, neither in the history, neither now. Even if he meant Luther, he is never infallible. I mean, Luther drank a lot of beer and so on. So he was never considered infallible. Infallible man in Rome, that's the dogma of papal ineffability, 1870, First Vatican Council. Maybe we will hear more. This is what he very often criticized, when a person stands on the place where the God-man or Jesus should stand. Also very interesting is, has gradually transformed. It means that there was a period before the transformation which was kind of where this didn't happen. He doesn't give us any details, so we don't know if it's 1517, 1054. When was it? He doesn't even mention like Yanaras and Romanides have the role of the Augustine of Hippo and the role of Franks and how this developed. We don't have anything with this, but just maybe it's gradually transformed. About the papal ineffability, maybe just to mention that it's really not so unproblematic issue in the Catholic Church. Not only that in the First Vatican Council the old Catholic churches separated because they agreed with the results, but they didn't really like this. And also Hans Kung is a theological rock star, which you probably know him. His book from the 1970s, Unenfehlbar, with the question mark, kind of made a lot of problems for him. He remained Roman Catholic, but he didn't. He's kind of the Catholic Commission. He was prohibited to teach, but he made his own program, and he's doing quite good. And there are some other voices. This is just one of the voices. So the common issues we saw, both Papism and Protestantism replaced God-man with the man. Man is higher than God. It's very interesting that also Houston repeats its quote from Chomyakov. We see here the influence of Slavonophiles, that the Papism is the first Protestantism, or first and earliest Protestantism. Somewhere he say Protestantism before Protestantism. Here we can see how he uses the word, and he uses the capital P, but he actually means the protest against the one holy Catholic Church, and so on. And Protestantism is then just the Papism applied in general. There's still the quotations from 1935. Applied as a result, consequence, application, where, and then maybe it's kind of vulgarization of Papism. This is maybe also interesting. In 1974, every Protestant is an independent pope. So Papism has one man that replaced the God-man. In Protestant churches, every Protestant replaced kind of the role of individualism and so on, replaced the Jesus Christ. So application means kind of white, spreading white. Okay. Now, that's the question. Was he actually right about Protestantism? About Pope. I mean, one of my theses which you can take is that Justin and Luther could have been allies. I think they are very similar in their accents, terminology, starting points, what they want to achieve about their goals. So just the Pope. I mean, putting together Papism and Protestantism is really weird, because if someone has been using really naughty words against Papism, that's Martin Luther. In 1517, he just wanted to limit the powers of the Pope, just that he is not really almighty. So we can hear he cannot remit any penalties and cannot remit any guilt. So at this point, Luther thought that Pope is really innocent, more or less, but the curia around him, there are those who are responsible for all those immoralities. And if you want, I can tell you some stories about money and buying the archbishop's chairs. That was basically behind in 1510 and at this very beginning. But later on, as the discussions were continuing, he was underlining they are subordinate of the Bible. So Bible is the primary source. So there is no time just to discuss about the relation between tradition and the Bible. For Luther, these are not two things which are in contrast. But if Pope and the Council are saying something which is not in the Bible, then they are wrong. This is basically the whole point. And he's not attacking a Chalcedon formula. He's attacking some things that even Justin would probably more even heavily attack. After 1520 and later on, Pope is the Antichrist, and he has three enemies: Pope, Turks, and Jews. All are taken as theological categories. And when I said that about how he was using the word Luther, Protestantism, Pope, one of my theories which we heard today is that these are not the historical categories, but they are theological categories. And I will show just one quotation where this is basically visible. And I use typology, or that this is the same methodology that the early church fathers were using when translating interpreting the Bible. No, universal priesthood this is important, is what he meant by the individualism, that every Protestant became a pope. Universal priesthood is one of the key concepts that started with Martin Luther, that each believer is a priest, each believer can read, understand the Bible by itself. You can see that he was referring to the 1 Peter 2:9. You are a royal priesthood and the priestly kingdom. And Revelation, you have made us into priests and kings. What he had in mind here is that every baptized Christian is a priest. It means that he can directly access to Jesus Christ. He doesn't need to pay money to the bishop who will do pray. He doesn't need to pray to the saints. This might be the provocative sentence here, the role of the saints. But take into account that the 15th, 16th century is really the caricature of the church, and this is what Luther was attacking. So you can directly pray to God. You don't have you have a Bible in Latin? Here you have. There's a Bible in German. Read it. If someone is saying you to do something which is not in the Bible, don't listen to it. Don't give them money to save your souls. Purgatory, indulgences, and so on and so on. This was the problem. This is how the Reformation started. Luther in the St. Andrew's Church, confessional people coming to him, confess their sins, and the Luther says, well done, no, pray, I know, do your repentance, and so on and so on. Oh, I don't have to. I have the paper. I bought it. Because Albrecht von Brandenburg needed the money, and so on and so on. Just maybe to finish it. So this is universal principle. This became a concept in the typical for the whole Protestant churches, and it goes to the hierarchy, government, rule, how the churches are organized, who can preach, what are the conditions. It is important maybe just to know that for Luther, and this is in Augsburg Confession, no one should publicly teach, preach, or administer the sacraments without a proper public call. So for Luther and for the German Reformation, the church, tradition, vocation are not excluded, but they are actually there. So giving the Bible in their own language to people so they can read caused several problems. One of them that Protestantism is fragmented into 2,000 churches, where each person who has another interpretation founds a new Bible, a new movement. I'm exaggerating there, not 2,000. But this is how basically this was going to the 18th century, Puritanism, non-conformist churches, etc., etc. But for Luther, the tradition, the church were not excluded. This is kind of very, very important. So not everybody can go and church and preach. You really need to be called by the church. You really need to have that they are approved. You really need to have the education, and so on and so on. Interpretation of the Bible, I already mentioned that, just maybe Luther. A simple layman armed with Scripture is greater than the mightiest pope without it. So that's about the role of the Bible, and each person can interpret. This is what used to mean by every Protestant is an infallible pope. Papism applied in general, so that everybody can read and interpret. Ecclesial reading, which we know from the or liturgical reading, is missing there, or maybe not. Uses methodology. I mean, this has been mentioned already today, and I already said this is a nice quote. What is Europe? What is meant by Europe? The European Pope is human lust for power. The European Luther is man's determination to explain everything by reason. So he combines historical and theological reading of the terms and gives them theological meaning. And I will have few more examples. Would they understand each other? I believe yes. Both were shepherds, pastors who really wanted to save the world, save the society. They were not acting out of any other reason but just to help the people. Their biggest enemy was the sin. Same as Justin was talking about Protestantism. Luther had problem with Jews. In the coffee I can say an example. Luther said, burn the synagogues. Was he anti-Semite? I don't know. Wasn't. Because he meant it as a theological category. So they even used the similar methodology. I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for some couples. I ask you to make short questions or comments, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two things. Just to point out something quickly. The quote you said about Europe. That's actually said by Vladimir Nikolai Velimirovich. And St. Houston quotes it in his book.
Okay.
Because there's a lot about Jews and everything, but that's actually a quote from Vladimir Nikolai, just to make
What the church and ecumenism, I think you're referring to this.
Yeah, this book that St. Houston, and it's a long quote, so you can easily lose track that it's a quote.
I will write you an email to send me the.
Yeah, I have it here. I double checked because I want to be sure I actually had the book with me.
Sermon, the full sermon.
Okay,
yeah.
No, it's
just to point it out. Yeah, and then I think because you said you don't understand, or it's illogical why he compared papism to Protestantism. And I think his main argument would be that the Pope, he neglected the faith, by putting himself. And then when Luther had a chance to do something good and turn back to the church fathers, to the church, he neglected the church by giving power to everyone, he would say, right? So he sees it as a natural progression of greed, of power, of lust for, oh, the Pope is wrong, we will not look at the church, we will ourselves now decide what is right, So I think that's more how he saw it, you know what I mean? So yeah,
I do understand Justin's logic.
Yeah.
I just said that if someone else would see it together, I mean, it seems as a nonsense.
And I think the issue we have today is that word Protestantism, Lutheranism, it can mean so many different things, right? And this is the issue we have. That what did he exactly mean?
I think he means Luther, according to my reading.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a brief comment, and I would like to answer something that's asked. It's more than a helpful presentation. It will surely help us distinguish many things and at least put aside unnecessary reasons for misunderstandings. So it's a very important presentation. I referred to your referring to the typos exemplum hermeneutic or exegetic instruments. It's very important because I found that in my work Revolt Against the Modern World, published in 2017, I actually argued this case without using those instruments in the conceptual sense. But I just want to thank you. It's encouraging to see that you find the same. And I think that the confusion between the ontological, so-called, and historical social levels have done a lot of damage, and that pointing out these things, as you successfully do, is a very positive contribution. You said, where would Popovich get his information about Protestant theology? It's worthy a paper in its own right, so I won't misuse my time. But I would say, forgive me for putting it this way, I would gamble with Russian dogmatic polemical compendia which came through the Ukraine in the 17th, 18th centuries into Russia, and then were recirculated through the white emigration in Sremsky Karlovci. That's one highway. And just on an anecdotal note, and I will finish, reading recently again Man in the Mill of Death, Człowiek u Wodenicy Śmierci. As I was reading, I stopped and I said, wait, this is absolutely not a theological terminology that Justin uses naturally, because it sounded neo-scholastic or quasi-scholastic, and what Justin says is that God is the sum of all perfections, and then he lists 1, 2, 3, or 4 perfections. And I said, wait, I can see here, I can see a Roman Catholic dogmatic layer book coming into a Protestant scholastic layer book, and then I was in a frenzy trying to see who exactly would use those phrases. And I translated Justin's sentence into Latin, and I got summa complexum perfectionis. And in, for instance, William Martin de Wette, in his 1813-1816 Lehrbuch der Christlichen Dogmatik, you get this, you have the sentence like that. So I said, wow. Okay. And now just the only question is where and how Justin get it. But when you read it back into the essay itself, it works quite perfectly, because we all profess, at least the Orthodox would profess this as well. So thank you very much, and thank you, moderator, for giving me the time.
Yeah. Thank you, very interesting. We are here in the field of pseudomorphosis and some which we cannot discuss now. Thank you very much for your contribution, and I give the